Synapse is a specialized site where a neuron communicates with another neuron or cell. A presynaptic neuron is a neuron that sends the message, and the postsynaptic neuron is the one receiving the message. There are two types of synapses, the electrical and chemical synapses. An electrical synapse have direct physical contact between the cells, and chemical synapse is where there is a signal transmitted across a gap by neurotransmitter. This gap is often referred to as the synaptic gap. The synaptic gap is the gap between the synaptic terminal and the postsynaptic cell, such as a muscle cell. The neurotransmitter is the chemical messenger that will bring that signal across the gap. Chemical synapse is the most common type of synapse between neurons, and it is the only type of synapse between neurons and other cells. There are two types of chemical synapses, the neuromuscular junction and a neuroglandular junction. A neuromuscular junction is the synapse between a neuron and a skeletal muscle, while the neuroglandular neuron is the synapse between a neuron and a gland cell. Here is a picture of how nerve impulse or action potential is transmitted. What will happen here is an action potential or a nerve impulse will come down the synaptic terminal of the presynaptic neuron. This nerve impulse will trigger the voltage-gated calcium channel to open, permitting the influx of calcium inside the cell. This will cause the synaptic vesicles carrying neurotransmitters to fuse in the cell membrane and release the neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. Once the neurotransmitters are released, it will bind to the receptors in the postsynaptic cell, resulting to the opening of the channels and influx of sodium ion inside the cell, leading to depolarization of the cell. These receptors or ion channels is what we call the ligand-gated ion channel because it requires the attachment of a ligand to the receptor binding site before the ion channel can be opened. Now, the postsynaptic neuron can also be a postsynaptic cell like the muscle cell. Neurotransmitters are chemical molecules that are released from the synapse of the neuron that moves across the synaptic cleft and binds to a target cell. Neurotransmitters can bind to another neuron or muscle cell or gland. And where those neurotransmitters bind, what part of the brain or what part of the body, they will determine what kind of effect they will have. When neurotransmitters move across the synapse and bind to a receptor on the target cell, we call that receptor a chemically gated channel or a ligand-gated channel. And most of the times, those channels will let ions move into or out of the cell. With neurotransmitter, when they bind to the target cell, they can excite that cell, and that is called an EPSP or an excitatory postsynaptic potential, or they can inhibit that cell, an IPSP or an inhibitory postsynaptic potential. An excitatory postsynaptic potential is going to trigger that movement of the ions so that the inside of the cell will become more positive and brings it closer to the threshold level for depolarization, whereas an inhibitory postsynaptic potential will cause a negative charge to either build up inside of the cell or positive charges to leave. Therefore, the cell will become hyperpolarized and further away from the threshold level. Neurotransmitters most of the time are made from amino acids, and sometimes they can be peptides, proteins, or sometimes they can be other substances like nitrous oxide or adenosine. Neurotransmitter is removed in three ways, either by diffusion, enzymatic destruction and reuptake by neurons or neuroglia. Some of the important neurotransmitters include acetylcholine, glutamate, aspartate, gamma-aminobutyric acid or GABA, glycine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, neuropeptides, and nitric oxide. Let us now look into the different types of neurotransmitters. We are going to look into their general characteristics, what kinds of effect they generally cause. Let's start with acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is made from the choline portion of a phospholipid and acetyl coenzyme A when pyruvate is oxidized. When we put acetyl coenzyme A and choline together, we will have acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter that causes muscle contraction. In our somatic system, we can voluntarily control our skeletal muscles. When we decide to contract the muscle, that neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. When acetylcholine binds, it is always excitatory and it will always cause muscle contraction. Acetylcholine is also important for thinking. We use it in our brain for cognitive functions. Thinking, learning, and memory are the very important role or function of acetylcholine. People who have Alzheimer's have reduced acetylcholine, making thinking, learning, and memory much more difficult. There are other aspects to that, but generally in people with Alzheimer's, there is a decrease in the number of neurons that produces acetylcholine. Dopamine is involved in motivational behavior and focusing attention. When you are trying to study and you can't, and you're distracted and your brain is all over the place and you're trying to focus but you're not absorbing the information, that is because your dopamine level is low. We need a certain amount of stress, not tons of it, but just enough to give us enough dopamine to be motivated to do things. Dopamine is important in paying attention, focusing, concentrating, and getting the task done. It is also very important in rewarding behaviors. Anything that is addictive, dopamine is playing a role on that. Dopamine also has another role. In the midbrain, dopamine will inhibit motor neuron. This is important in controlling motor movements. And without dopamine in the midbrain, you will have uncontrolled muscle movements. That is involved in Parkinson's disease. Endorphins are natural opiates and their effects are generally inhibitory. They are involved with reduction of pain and stress, and they also makes us feel good and pleasurable. They also give us feelings of happiness or what we call runner's high. Glutamate is made from glutamine. They are the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter, and without glutamate, you have very decreased cognitive function. We need to have glutamate so that we can think, plan, and solve problems. Excess amounts of glutamate can cause anxiety because it's very stimulating. It is also involved in seizures and it can cause excitotoxicity. Way too much glutamate can actually kill neurons. Excess glutamate is produced during alcohol withdrawal and can cause delirium tremens in highly alcohol-dependent people. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are both hormones and neurotransmitters. They are made by the ANS when we have a sympathetic nervous system reaction. This will cause all the typical stress response, things to happen like dilation of pupils, increase in heart rate, dilation of the bronchioles and blood vessels. GABA or gamma-aminobutyric acid and glycine are made from amino acid called glutamine, same as your glutamate. So glutamate is also made from glutamine as well as GABA. The action of glutamate is mostly excitatory. So it's an excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA is the total opposite of glutamate. No? GABA is the inhibitory neurotransmitter. And because of that, glutamate and GABA should be balanced. If there is too much GABA, you are going to feel tired. And if you have too much glutamate, you are going to feel anxious. So we want those neurotransmitters to be balanced. GABA and glycine are our anti-anxiety neurotransmitters, and they play an important role in making you feel calm. Serotonin is your calm and content neurotransmitter. It is associated with depression. So if you have low serotonin, you tend to have higher risk of depression. People used to think serotonin as our happy hormone, but serotonin does not make you happy as in excited happy. No? Excited happy is gonna come from dopamine, norepinephrine, and some acetylcholine, and probably glutamate too. No? But serotonin is when you had a very delicious meal, no? That feeling of contentment, no? That feeling after you've eaten really good food. So the calm and content and relaxed and satisfied feeling, and you feel really very good. That is serotonin. Craving comfort food is your brain's way of trying to increase serotonin. We actually make more serotonin in our digestive tract than in our brain. The serotonin that we make in our digestive tract impacts our brain and tells us that we are good and comfortable and relaxed and content. Serotonin plays an important role in regulating our appetite and our mood. So basically, the action of serotonin is more of inhibitory, and primarily, it is produced in the GIT, causing a feeling of contentment, and it also regulates our mood, appetite, and sleep. Low levels of serotonin is associated with depression. Do you remember ATP, adenosine triphosphate? That's our energy molecule. And when we use up ATP, we produce some excess free adenosine. This free adenosine can bind to receptors, and it makes us feel tired because you use up energy, which is logical. When there is an increase in adenosine, it makes us feel tired and we fall asleep. Adenosine slows neural signaling, and it triggers sleep. Another neurotransmitter not included in the list is anandamide. Anandamide binds to cannabinoid receptors, the same receptors like cannabis, marijuana binds to, and in our body it is not psychoactive, but it does play a role in reducing inflammation and decreasing pain and increasing pleasurable feelings. Anandamide binds to cannabinoid receptors in the CNS and the PNS, and it is involved in functioning of the immune system, reduces inflammation, it reduces pain, it is involved in increasing appetite and pleasure. Another neurotransmitter that we are familiar with is histamine, and we often think of histamine as our allergy molecule, which is true. There will be an increase in secretion of histamine when you have an allergic reaction, but it is also involved in thinking. So basically, histamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter in our brain, and that is why when you take an antihistamine medication for allergy, it makes you feel tired and sleepy. The general action of histamine is mostly stimulatory. It promotes wakefulness, it increases cognitive function, and regulates appetite. It also plays a significant role in immune function and inflammation and allergic reactions. Now, let us look at the effects of some drugs and some chemicals to our neurotransmitters. When drugs have an effect in our brain and in our body, if they increase the effect of the neurotransmitter, they are called agonists, or if they block the effects of neurotransmitters, they are called antagonists. Drugs can affect the production of neurotransmitters, their receptors, or their degradation. Let us talk about nicotine first. Nicotine is a stimulant and it acts on acetylcholine and dopamine receptors, and it is highly addictive. Remember that acetylcholine is associated in cognitive thinking, learning, and memory, while dopamine is involved in motivation and reward. That is why nicotine is extremely addictive. Now, we also have Adderall and amphetamine. So, amphetamine is a stimulant and it acts on dopamine receptor. That is why it is used to treat attention deficit disorder, because dopamine neurotransmitter is involved in focusing attention. And in high doses, amphetamine can also cause euphoria. Alcohol has a lot of interesting effects. It impacts multiple neurotransmitters, it increases some and it decreases some neurotransmitter, and it has a weird ability to be a stimulant and a depressant. For example, alcohol and dopamine. So, alcohol increases dopamine, which is reward, pleasure, and motivation. So, if you are partying and drinking alcoholic drinks, it can make you motivated to do things. Maybe not smart things, because you also decreases acetylcholine, which is responsible for thinking and making choices. Acetylcholine is also responsible for muscle contraction. So, if acetylcholine is decreased in the cerebellum, which is part of the brain that helps you coordinate muscle movement, and alcohol highly targets the cerebellum, which makes you lose your coordination abilities. With glutamate, alcohol decreases glutamate. Glutamate is also a thinking molecule. And when you decrease glutamate, you decrease anxiety. This is why alcohol makes you feel relaxed. However, there is a rebound effect for glutamate. So the next day, the glutamate that was decreased during alcohol consumption will be increased. And so, frequent alcohol consumption can significantly increase anxiety and depression. The effect of alcohol is dose-dependent. The more alcohol consumed, the more these effects will occur. Alcohol also increases GABA and serotonin neurotransmitters. So, GABA is our anti-anxiety neurotransmitter that makes us feel calm and relaxed. And it also produces some serotonin, which makes us feel content and maybe more sociable. Opiates like morphine, codeine, and heroin inhibits pain transmission by binding to opiate receptors. These opiates also causes euphoria in high amounts, and it is highly addictive. Ephedrine is a drug that affects epinephrine. It is a stimulant that binds to epinephrine receptors, thereby releasing epinephrine in the sympathetic pathways. Sometimes, ephedrine are put into medicines that makes you feel tired. So, if you have a non-drowsy version of medications, it usually have a little bit of ephedrine in it. Valium, diazepam, clonazepam, and lorazepam, these are also known as your benzodiazepines, and they bind to GABA receptors. So, GABA receptors are inhibitory, so they are used to treat panic attacks and insomnia. However, these benzodiazepines are very addictive. And we also have what we call SSRIs, or the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are medication used to treat depression by reducing the uptake of serotonin. So it stays in the synapse longer, but they have many digestive effects or side effects. SSRIs cannot cause hallucinations because they just prevent the reuptake of the normal amount produced by the brain. When serotonin is released from the neurotransmitter and goes into the synapse, normally the serotonin is taken back up and it will be released again when it is signaled. When serotonin reuptake inhibitor prevents the reuptake, which means that the serotonin stays in the synapse and it can keep acting on the target cell to make you feel less depressed. Because serotonin is produced by the digestive system, there can be some digestive system side effects in the beginning of taking serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And then we also have caffeine. No? Caffeine acts as an antagonist in adenosine receptor. So adenosine, no, it makes us feel sleepy, no? Adenosine. Now, as an antagonist, caffeine will inhibit adenosine, no, neurotransmitter, from being released to the synaptic cleft. Thereby, caffeine also inhibits sleep.